Thomas rolled back into Tidmouth Sheds, feeling deeply unnerved and shaking violently. Henry noticed this, and felt very concerned for his friend.
Thomas? What's wrong?
He asked. Thomas let out a quick scream, as if he was deeply distracted, and Henry's sudden question had startled him.
Ah! Yes, Henry. I'm okay.
He stuttered, trying to compose himself. But Henry was persistent. He wanted to know what had frightened Thomas to the core.
Come on, Thomas. I know full well when you're like this, you're dealing with something that's bugging you. It's okay. You can tell me.
Henry reassured. Thomas stared at Henry for a minute, before taking a deep breath and recollecting his experience.
It all started when I was coming back from Brenham Docks after helping out Salty and the rest with the workload. I had just entered your forest after Edward Station when I noticed a figure near the side of the line, almost obscured by the trees and bushes.
Thomas paused for a minute, composing himself.
When I squinted to get a closer look at who, or dare I say what I was looking at, I saw a big, exaggerated smile plastered on the person's face. I swear it looked as if the skin would tear from being so stretched out. It was then that I realized that the person was a woman. What was even more disturbing was that the smile didn't seem pleasant or warm. It seemed to be the worst intentions. Her eyes were also wide open as if they were stapled open. Just when I was about to ask my crew to get us out of there, the woman let out this gut-wrenching, ear-piercing scream that felt like it would cut through you. We all screamed in horror and my crew threw open my regulator, and we sped off down the line, and I swear on my life I heard the most evil of laughter echoing from the forest as we raced away.
After he was done telling his story, Thomas looked up to Henry, expecting him to burst out laughing, or make a remark about Thomas being a silly little engine. But to his surprise, Henry was as pale as him.
I never stopped to think if she was still around, but, I guess she is.
A nearby voice replied. Thomas and Henry quickly looked over to the far side of the sheds to see Edward with a solemn look on his face.
What do you mean, Edward?
Henry asked. Edward sighed before looking down at his buffers.
The woman you saw in the forest was a person that I knew back when the railway was still under development. Her name was Mary Hansen. She was... I'm very sorry to say this. She was... Well, she wasn't that much of a pleasant soul. In fact, when I first met her, the first thing she said to me was,
"Posh up, you clanky old kettle."
Edward took a deep breath before continuing.
After that, I thought it was best to not give her any of my attention, and boy did that help. Unfortunately, because of her attitude and reputation, it brought with her many enemies. One of them being a man named Johnson Banker who despised Mary the most. So much that one night when Mary was walking home from one of the shops through the same forest that goes through my station, Johnson, who had been secretly following her, was armed with a knife. And, well, I don't think I need to explain to you what happens. While Johnson was arrested and sentenced to death a few days later after accidentally dropping the knife he used to commit the act, ever since then, the ghost of Mary Hansen haunts that forest, eager to get back at the man who took her life. But I guess she never will.
Thomas and Henry stared in utter horror at what they just listened to. But after a minute of silence, Henry spoke up.
But if she's been haunting the forest for that long, how come she's just now made her presence known?
He asked.
Maybe it's the anniversary of her murder.
Thomas added.
Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that today marks exactly 100 years since it happened. I just never stopped to think that she'd still be lurking around that forest, but I just sure hope that she finds peace and moves on after that horrible, horrible incident.
Edward sadly sighed. Thomas and Henry could only agree. The three engines had less than a good night. None of them could get the idea of Mary out of their smoke boxes for a long time afterwards. Especially Thomas, for he was the one who was scared out of his wits by her. And ever since then, he, Edward and Henry would always tense up while passing by the same area of the tree line, for fear of catching a glimpse of Mary Hanson, the figure in the forest.